is true crime and it will be whispered, not to any disrespect of the family or victims, but just because I prefer to hear true crime in this type of watching these. And if you have any triggers to any kind of, murder, gruesome beating, physical abuse, domestic abuse, violence, drugs, this is not the case for you. This one's pretty. So Jamie Fuller, who was 16 at the time, brutally killed his 14-year-old girlfriend August 23rd, 1991. Now, let me give you a little backstory. Now, these two had been kind of off and on, and had been seeing other people the last year or so. So they were not exclusive, but did seem to care about each other. But he had a very tumultuous, abusive relationship, and it just was not healthy at all. Jamie was a small boy, and he started taking steroids and really getting fit and looking good and feeling really powerful. The problem was this also changed his behaviors. He wasn't that sweet kid anymore. He was a kind of a ticking time bomb, as steroids can do. And steroids can also be very addictive. You think more is better, because what he did to her was just unbelievable. I always had a troublesome Jamie and Amy always had a troubled romantic relationship. The 2 years preceding the killing, and in the last year, each dated other people. This is what the court's saying. And this increased the tension between them. Fuller spoke several times of killing the victim to her and to others, especially his friends. He would kind of threaten her all the time. I'm gonna kill you, I'm gonna kill you. He would tell his friends, you just watch me. And his friends would say, you're not gonna do it, you're not gonna kill her. And he said, quote, watch me. I bet I will, unquote. So he had discussed different ways of how to kill his girlfriend, Amy. He was thinking about having somebody beat her up. The defense was trying to say that Jamie had no control over his actions because of the drugs and the frame of mind he was in. And they just didn't, believe him. They said sorry, just because of how he acted after the killings. So obviously, it says Fuller spoke several times of killing the victim, but he had a discussion with his friends of ways to the victim to procure an abortion without her having to obtain parental consent. So she must have been pregnant at the time. Having someone beat up Amy as to cause a miscarriage or having her killed. So, not only if she was pregnant, and we don't know at this time yet, but that would be 2 murders, really. The day before the killing, he had taken a trip to Gloucester with 2 girls and 2 boys. When the defendant, Jamie, had learned about this. So, Amy, she goes to Gloucester with 2 girls and 2 boys. And when Jamie finds out about this, he is pissed. He reports to Zev saying, I'm getting sick of this. I swear I'm going to kill her. This shit's got to stop. She won't be around to go out with anyone anymore. I'm going to effing kill her, quote, unquote. The next morning, he called her repeatedly and insisted that she come to his house to meet him. on the day of the killing before she actually arrived at his house, I guess. The defendant met a Dominic Scola and later Mark Demule. Scola testified that Jamie said he was going to kill the victim and that he invited Scola to come along with them. He later told Mark Demule the same thing when Demule taunted him with that. He said, quote, "I didn't have the balls to do it," unquote. The defendant replied, quote, "You'll see," unquote. Very menacing words coming from a 16-year-old boy who's dating a 14-year-old girl. So Jamie and his two friends met her, Amy. They were joined by Michael Millett and briefly by Scott Ward. This group walked out of the defendant's house and along a path into a field. So all these kids, I just want to pause right here. All of these kids knew that they were walking into a field where he was swearing he was going to kill her and did nothing, didn't tell her, didn't help her. I think that's terrible. Now, none of them were convicted of the crime, but just having known that and not saying anything to her, I don't think it was right. The defendant and the victim, so Jamie and Amy, walked separate from the others down this path into the middle of a field. The others started hearing these screams, and screams is like they started freaking out, and then they see Jamie reappear in the woods without Amy, and he's covered in her blood, or he's covered in blood. He looks and says, quote, to all his friends, "It's done," unquote. He had a smirk on his face. He showed the others his knife and said it had broken during the attack. He also said to Demule, quote, "The bitch shouldn't mess with me," unquote. Demule testified that as the group walked away from the scene, Fuller described how he had killed the victim. So now he's going to tell them, but why don't they go and try to help her? Like, why would they just walk away? I don't understand this. Why wouldn't anybody run to her aid? Why was she such, I don't understand. If there's all these people, not one of them felt the need to go help rescue her. I find that very strange. So, I don't know. He's explaining now how he actually murdered her. He said, "The bitch shouldn't have messed with me," unquote. So, this is as they're walking away. Fuller reported to the group that, quote, he placed his hand over her mouth and said, "I love you," then stabbed her in the stomach, and then got behind her and pushed it so that he could feel the point of the knife hit his stomach. Then he stabbed her in the back, and she tried to pull away, and she bit him. His hand, right on his hand, and then she screamed. She tried to run and grab her by the hair. She tried to run, but he grabbed her by the hair and pulled her back and covered her mouth again, and then cut her throat. He's 16 to a little 14-year-old. When she was on the ground, she kept saying, "I love you, Jamie, I love you," and she was gargling on her own blood. And he said it pissed him off, so he stomped on her head, unquote. So he's stomping on her head as she's saying, "I love you, I love you, I love you," and he tells her he loves her before he stabs her, to the point of where it goes through her, so he could feel it on his stomach. That's sick. I mean, that's nothing. I mean, so further testimony about Fuller's conduct after the killing. So what happened was, during the trial, he tried to say that he was mentally not competent. He couldn't really, he shouldn't be blamed for his actions because, for one, he was a minor. Two, he just didn't know. He was out of his mind. He was on drugs, whatever. He was just not in the right frame of mind. But the thing is, at Scola's house, he washed the blood off his arms, drank red Kool-Aid because it was the, quote, right for the occasion. Quote, right for the occasion, unquote. Took Mallet to see the body and then warned his companions that they would be next if they were to say anything. So he knows what he did, obviously, right there, saying that he knew he was in the wrong. If they said anything, he was gonna kill them. So then his friends proceed to help him. Later that day, Fuller led his friends into the task of disposing of the victim's body. They obtained 2 trash bags, 2 cinder blocks, and lobster line, which would not fray in the water. And he and Mallet threw the weighted body into Shoe Pond. Thereafter, he denied knowing the victim's whereabouts to the police and his friends, and joined in searching for her. So now, he's not only murdered her in the most horrific way possible, but then knows exactly where she's buried and goes on searching for her like nothing happened. The terror she's feeling, this man that she loved, is murdering her, okay? And tells her he loves her just before he plunges a knife into her. Then he takes 2 cinder blocks, or a lobster line, and dumps her body into the Shoe Pond. Then, the next day, he goes out looking for her. So he doesn't tell where her whereabouts are to the police. But finally, on August 28th, 5 days after the killing, Mallet led the police to the victim's body, and Fuller was arrested. At the time of his arrest, he, quote, put on half a smile and smirk and began to chuckle, unquote. I don't know, if I were her parents, I would have had a hard time not punching him in the face. During questioning, Fuller was calm and accused his friends of killing her. At the trial, the defense made a convincing showing, principally through cross-examination of the Commonwealth's witness, that for some time Fuller had been using steroids. He had been small and shy, but 1.5 years prior to the killing, he grew quickly and gained some 30 pounds. He began to drink, quote, all the time, unquote, and became quarrelsome and aggressive. There was testimony from several witnesses that they had seen him buying what they thought to be steroids, and that they had seen him with pills, vials, and hypodermic needles to inject the steroids. One witness testified that he had provided Fuller at his request with a hypodermic needle. There was also testimony that his buttocks were sore because of the needle, to prove that because of the steroids he actually killed her, and that he should not be held accountable. 3 experts, 2 psychiatrists, and a clinical psychologist testified on Fuller's behalf. Dr. John Thomas Grizzo, a clinical psychologist and professor of psychiatry at the University of Massachusetts, had been Department of Youth Services to perform a court-ordered evaluation of Fuller. Fuller had told Grizzo about using alcohol and steroids since the age of 14, based, among other things, on early childhood factors. So now he's claiming he was neglected as a child. The abandonment of his father and his mother's alcoholism and depression made him a testified that Fuller had suffered from. Together with the alcohol consumption, this substantially impaired his ability to appreciate the wrongfulness of his conduct. I'm kind of angry at this. Dr. Griswold concealed that he did not have an opinion as to whether, by reason of mental disease or defect, the defendant, Jamie Fuller, lacked the substantial capacity to appreciate the wrongfulness of killing the victim. Ultimately, Dr. Griswold testified that Fuller's mental disease or defect substantially impaired his ability to appreciate, but that Fuller was capable of forming the specific intent to kill. Okay, so when cross-examined, he was like, well, yes, it did impair his judgment. However, he was capable of forming the specific intent to kill, and he then covered it up. It's one thing to do something because you're pissed at somebody on the spur of the moment, then go, oh my god, I don't know what I did, I'm out of my mind. But he literally went back to his friends, said, I'm gonna kill any one of you if you tell, and then drank red Kool-Aid, washed his hands, washed his clothes, went and disposed of the body, didn't even, there was a lot of time there that he had to come to his senses and realize what he had done was wrong, and then help search for the body. No, I'm not doing that. Dr. Harrison Pope, a psychiatrist, he's assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, provided the principal testimony regarding Fuller's anabolic steroid use. His physical examination of Fuller confirmed the conclusion, so that he was using steroids. He described the psychiatric effects of steroid use and of what he called steroid intoxication. Steroids may increase and cause aggression, a brooding irritability, and while they act as an antidepressant, discontinuing their use may result in rebound depression. He also called dependence and major depressive illnesses based on Fuller's statement to him that he had last taken 48 hours before he murdered poor Amy. There was no reason for him to have been coming down or, he wasn't off of steroids, he had just taken a shot. Yes, he could have been intoxicated, he's saying, from this, but it's how he acted after, really, that I find, and I think the jury found, to be so just disgusting. They had been off and on for 2 years. They had dated other people, both of them, not just her. And he even said the day before, that's it, she's not going to be ever able to go with anybody else ever again. That to me just is such jealousy and insecurity on his part. So, he just had so many opportunities. Why were his friends, why were they egging him on? Why didn't they say, why would you want to do that, but, risk being put in jail? There were so many, it was like 4 or 5 of them. None of these kids had any conscience about what was going to happen to Amy. That I'd like to know. Just the explanation of how he murdered her was so horrifying. That really sticks in my mind. So everybody agreed he was indeed suffering from a mental illness, but mentally ill people still can make rational decisions. And yes, they may, if he acted on a decision that was made out of sheer, anger, then why not run to the police or run to your friends instead of saying, I'm going to kill you all if you don't help me hide the body, and then going on a search the next day. It was one of his friends that felt the guilt and actually told the police where she was. So, his capacity to fully appreciate the wrong magnitude of misconduct. They keep saying that over and over throughout the trial as if to convince themselves or the jury. I'm not really sure, because it sounds like they're trying to convince themselves that what they're saying is actually credible after listening. As a psychiatrist, I could not sit there after listening to what he did to her and how he said, oh, I love you, and she's telling him, I love you, Jamie, I love you, and he's just, bashing her head in with his feet, and slicing her throat, and then, anyway, so then they're having a cross-examination. Dr. Whaley stated that, quote, my opinion would be that he did not lack the substantial capacity either to appreciate the wrongfulness of conduct or control his conduct by reason of a mental disease or defect. The Commonwealth's rebuttal witness, Dr. Martin Kelly, a psychiatrist on the teaching staff of Brigham and Women's Hospital and a forensic psychiatrist, testified that in his opinion, on the basis of review of the record and of the expert testimony in this case, Fuller did not suffer from major depression, which he characterized as a mental disease or defect, and that while Fuller abused alcohol, he did not suffer from alcohol dependence. Dr. Kelly further testified, based on Fuller's actions, and this is what I was, quote, did not describe symptoms consistent with what happened. Like, he wasn't crazy, he was very calm and just, nonchalant, like, you watch me, I'm gonna kill her. He says, consistent with what happens when you take steroids, I found no symptoms of either manic symptoms or depressive symptoms that might be related to steroid use. So, first and foremost, there's a very perplexing contention here in the district court judge's mind. And this is whether to transfer him to the Superior Court for trial as an adult, or should have considered that Fuller would be subject to the establish a minimum of 15 years and a maximum sentence of 20 years for a juvenile adjudicated delinquent by reason of having committed murder in the first degree, because he was only 16. I think, personally, without even going on this, the way he killed her, how he had planned in the last even year to kill her, and that he did not want her to be with him. He was thinking like an adult. It wasn't like he was a child. He was old enough to shoot steroids and to, run around with his friends. He doesn't show any mental illness. So, under the amendment, custody is to be transferred from the Department of Youth Services to the Department of Corrections after the juvenile reaches the age of 21 years. Prior to this revision, such a juvenile would have to be released from custody upon reaching the age of 21. Well, that's good. That Fuller presented a serious danger to the public, and that he could not be rehabilitated within the juvenile system by the time he turned 21 years. After the completion of his trial, accordingly, the district court judge transferred Fuller for trial in the Superior Court. So now he's tried as an adult, which I think he should be. Okay, Celeste Fuller, Jamie's mother. something that he had done to himself. And she was hired 2 guards to actually help him escape. Well, a month prior to this, the authorities figured this out, and immediately he was given a life sentence. And the sad thing is that it was 2 years later. The plan called for Fuller's 18-year-old Jamie Fuller to slash himself with a razor blade Thursday night, inflicting wounds serious enough to require sending him to the hospital outside the Concord prison for treatment. Once he was there, he was going to agree to be treated and stitched up. Then the 2 armed gunmen were to escape with him. I don't even know how this would play, like how this could even be possible. Assistant Attorney Kurt Schwartz said that Fuller and Golding were arraigned in Concord District Court. So those are the 2 people that were helping him, apparently. But authorities who had gotten wind of the plot 3 weeks earlier set Fuller up with a state trooper and federal agent posing as hired guns. Armed with a warrant, they uncovered officers taped numerous telephone conversations and face-to-face meetings in which Fuller allegedly detailed her plans. So, I mean, this woman is crazy. I mean, I understand, but what are you going to... Okay, so let's think this through. So she gets him out of jail, and where did they go? I mean, was she going to move to Bermuda, to, Zimbabwe? I mean, he'd have to change his name. I mean, you just don't get somebody out of prison and just walk down the street, and just because they're out doesn't mean they're free. She's a 39-year-old woman. Not thinking clearly, apparently. Both of these people were held on bail. That is so sad. Poor Amy's family, because now this just pulls the heartstrings of Amy's family. They have to deal with their deceased daughter, and now his mother is trying to get him out of prison for what he did to her. If I was a mother and I had a son who did that, I would never want him out of jail. The way he murdered her was just unexcusable. And, I'm really upset about the friends, too, because they didn't get anything. But they were there. They let him walk her down a dark road after taunting him that he couldn't kill her, and he said he would. And then they hear her screaming. Don't you think one of them has gone after him? I don't know. I just find that so strange. I really do. Because if you're my friend, you would keep me from killing somebody, for one, and 2, to protect that person. I mean, if you're my friend, pretend you hated this girl, you would still have to know I was probably gonna go to jail. 9 times out of 10, people are caught. I mean, yes, there are people that have not been caught. I get that. But this girl was not going to be missing for long, and too many people knew about it. So why allow your friend to go through with something like that, or even think that they might go through with something like that, as angry as he was? I mean, Amy was such a beautiful girl. She had her whole life ahead of her, and he took that. And here's this mother, and I was reading where the neighbor said that, Celeste Fuller, was normally at neighborhood barbecues, very social, and when he got put away, and the verdict was declared as life in prison, she would lock herself in her house, close the shades to her apartment. Quote, she just comes and goes without a word, unquote, said the next door neighbor. ugly. So it's just so sad that not only was this girl's parents dragged through this trial and made to listen to these horrific accounts by Fuller, but then they had to listen to how his mother and two guards were planning on, having him break free. And what were they planning on doing with him? This is a very sad case. It was back quite a while ago, but she was a couple years younger than me. And another life taken way too soon. Way too soon. So, just wanted to get just a little bit of triggers in and just relax you a little. After that story, it was pretty intense. I know that some people, my fingers get stuck. It's harder on some than others, which is why I put the disclaimer out there first. But I try to put myself in the victim's shoes. Now, some people say that she should have left him when she did and not gone back, but he was just a jealous, insecure person. That's what it sounds like to me. He didn't want, if he couldn't have her, nobody could have her. And that is sad. You hear, I think when I was in law school, they said the amount of people that are in an abusive relationship that actually are murdered, it's like 25 to 30%. I don't know if it's still that high, but that was, 6 years ago, so it's still very high, I think. So there's abuse hotlines, and if you think you're in an abusive relationship and you think they're on drugs or using steroids or something that could make them go off the deep end, then you needed to call somebody. Try to help you get out of it. Tell your parents. I'm sure she tried to tell her parents. I don't know. It doesn't obviously say in the court records. But I wanted to give the most honest account of this as I could, because I know that there's been movies and stuff made of this and it's been talked about a lot. And sometimes things can get fabricated. So I went directly to the source and pulled the court records of exactly what was said in court. And that was disturbing enough for me. I didn't need to see a movie that, kind of I like this sweater because I like fabric sounds. I think they're so relaxing. Relax, relax, relaxing, relax, relaxing, relax, relax, relaxing, relaxing. So I just love it. It's nice and ribbed. subscribe.